Hello, my name's Curtis, and I wanted to make this video to explain what I've been doing with my guitar rig for the past couple of months. So, due to all the time and the money spent on my undergrad degree in music, I've spent the greater part of the last 6 or 7 years kind of tragically and ironically not playing any music. And my guitars and my gear have been kind of collecting dust in my basement all that time. So now I'm just about halfway through my master's degree in audio technology, and over the last 10 months or so, I've kind of, my love for guitar has been reignited, and I'm nerding out pretty hardcore over it, even more than ever. So what I wanted to do was change what I had been doing, which is great because, I thought I knew how things went back in the day when I was playing regularly. But coming back to it from such a hiatus, I have a lot of freedom to kind of drastically change how I attack my style of play and the equipment I use to get the sounds and control that I want, especially after all the stuff that I learned when I was in school working with digital audio and that kind of stuff. A fair warning here, I'm definitely not a traditional guitar player, whatever that means. I'm pretty big into all this gross over-the-top stuff that most guitar players really try to avoid. I like doing things like breaking filters and pushing things beyond what they're supposed to do, and I'm all for not being subtle. I can be subtle if I want to, but I really try to find outrageous ways to play this awesome instrument. So, with that out of the way, let's kind of move on here. So, what I used to play through was a stack of pedals on a board and a big multi-effects unit, which split my signal into stereo, and I fed it into the front of these two amps that are pretty different. One of them is a Crate Shockwave GT3500H, which is pushing a 412 Crate cab with about 350 watts of solid state power. And to complement it, I had and I still have my Rivera Knucklehead Reverb 100 watt top pushing through a Rivera 412 loaded with vintage 30s. Rivera took this amp and later they bumped the power up a little bit more, and Mick Thompson is using it as his signature amplifier. So that's what I was doing. Here's some pictures of my pedals and some of the weird gear that I picked up, some infrared controllers, a synthesizer that I used with a MIDI guitar, like a GK pickup. I gotta tell you, that's not a fun way to try and mess with sound. Another picture of my pedal board with the synthesizer and everything all hooked up. In the jam space that I used to play at. And then back to the two amps. So, my strategy was to scoop the crate and push the mids on the Rivera and get a nice brick of a sound. Of course, I was young and stupid, and I'm hopefully not so much of either anymore. I don't feel the need to cart around these gigantic amps to prove how cool I am, so I wanted to go with a more streamlined solution as far as hardware was concerned that would still allow me to experiment with all the crazy shit that I do with audio. So a lot of people told me, get the Axe Effects, which is basically just a fantastic modeler with really good algorithms and a tone match system that helps you match the sound of an amp or recording as closely as possible. Somebody at the local Long and McQuaid told me about the Kemper Profiler amp, which kind of put my head for a spin. He didn't really know how all the terms worked correctly, like the vocabulary of the audio engineering stuff. But when he explained how it worked, I understood that it's a convolution filter that uses an impulse response from your amplifiers to kind of model them or profile them, as Kemper likes to say. It's really intriguing to me because audio engineers have been doing this for a long time, mostly with reverb in their digital audio workstations. I figure the future of digital guitar tech, if it has anywhere to go, this would be it. It's like an old solution to an old problem that nobody seems to have thought of for guitar until now, which just gets my mojo going. Both of these units are crazy expensive. Following the advice just selling all my gear is a lot easier to say than to do, especially when you live in a small city in Canada. So, knowing that both of these units are basically just computers, I thought I'd just find a way to use a desktop or a laptop computer to do what I wanted without it sounding cheap. So I figured I'd look at a bunch of applications for the computer. Everybody told me, go check out Amplitube, and I did, and it sucked. Well, I think it sucks anyway. That's just me. You guys are probably going to think what I came up with here sucks, but, that's okay. We all have our own opinions, as long as we think we sound good. or sound the way we want, I should say. One of the top contenders I found was this guy, Scuffham, or Scuffham, or I'm not exactly sure how he likes it pronounced, but these amps are just basically, they're models that he made. They're not really modeling any other amps specifically. They're just an algorithmic amp that he designed, and they sound really great. They were just built by their creator, but they have cabinet simulation that will use an algorithm if you want. But you can also load in your impulse responses of speakers and cabinets and stuff like that, kind of like the Kemper does, and you can load your own custom impulse responses into it. It sounds really great. And I was just about to pull the trigger on it when I discovered Positive Grid. I tried out their Bias software, they call it Bias Amp. It's pretty cool. It'll let you design your amplifier right down to components and like bias knobs and all sorts of stuff. It sounds really nice with their cabinet impulse response filters, which you can also plug your own impulse responses into, and it has tone matching just like the Axe Effects does. I don't think there's a picture of it here on the website, but yeah. Oh, look, this is what the pros say, etc., etc., etc. Well, anyway, I listened to it, and I downloaded the demo, and I played with it, and I was like, this is it. This is what I want. They also kind of took it a step further because they're going forward on the hardware front too, and they've designed this thing they call the Bias Head, which is basically just like a hardware container for whatever amps you design in the software. You upload it with a USB cable, and it has an integrated power amp, and you can tweak it and play around with it like an amp, which is pretty sweet. It's less than half the price of either the Kemper or the Axe Effects, which is pretty cool. Plus, it comes with a power amp like standard. But you know, I don't have the money to blow on something like that unless I sold my Rivera, which kind of seems like a failing prospect at this point. But it has no extra functionality other than simple connectivity and a power amp over the plugin that they release, which is $200. So that's what I went with, was the Bias Amp plugin. This thing. So now what you need to use the software is either a standalone application or to use a plugin inside of a host like a digital audio workstation such as Pro Tools or Cubase. But I wanted more flexibility, and I opted to use Max. Now Max is something I've been using in school for quite a while. Sometimes it's known as Max MSP, but that title is kind of outdated. I use this software all the time for building things and working through computer logic and creating audio filters and control schemes. It'll host VST plugins, it'll host other types of plugins. It will directly access input and output hardware you have connected to your computer. It'll work with MIDI data, internet data, like IP data, serial data, all sorts of stuff. It's modular, and all these little objects here that you can see. I don't know if you can see them. Little dials and buttons and little names and stuff like that. They're like classes if you were in a programming environment using C++ or something like that. They do something, and you learn what they do, and you connect them together in this nodal system where you're connecting things using these little cables, and you just move your logic forward, and you make some pretty neat stuff. You can basically make whatever you want, and you create the user interface on the fly as you program your stuff. And I really like this because I can make some pretty crazy stuff, and I like to use it to connect hardware that does not know how to talk to each other, which is really neat. You can bring the MIDI in, you can bring the internet stuff in, you can bring all that stuff in that doesn't know how to talk to each other, and then you use those objects to make them talk to each other, which is really neat. You can come up with all sorts of cool stuff. So, let me show you what Max looks like, and what I've kind of started doing here. This is my guitar rig at the moment, and I'll go through these little sections and explain how it works. But first, let's just start a new little patcher here, and I'll show you like a quick idea of how this works. So I'm going to use some shortcuts and hotkeys and stuff here, but I'm going to create an object, and I'm going to call it VST with a tilde to say it's an audio object. What this is going to do is it's going to load in the VST plugin. Now it takes the messages to tell it what to do. Open is one message it likes, and plug is another message. I'm going to take these messages and plug them in, lock my patch so I can use it instead of edit it, and I click plug. It'll say, hey, what plugin do you want to load? So I'm going to pick, I don't know, that one. Then I click open. Bam, there's the plugin. It exists right there. Now, that's not it. You gotta send audio to it and take audio out. So if you were to create an object up here, and we'll get it to, I have it here on my patch, there's a microphone picture there. That's bringing audio in from my audio interface, and you plug it into here with a different kind of cable. This is gray. The other cables, like over here, they're this yellow black stripe, indicating this is an audio cable or an audio patch, not like computer logic. And you send it down to a speaker, like down here with an output, and you do a bunch of, make sure the gain is okay and all that kind of stuff. You can do other things like create oscillators. So here's a sine oscillator. It's called cycle, and then like in computer science, you know your difference between floating point numbers and integers and all that kind of stuff. Here's an integer. I'm going to plug it into here, and I'm going to choose the frequency in hertz of that sine oscillator, and then I'm going to take this and plug it into my speaker and all that kind of stuff. So that's just sort of a really quick, super dirty way of showing you how Macs can work. So what I've done here, no, I don't want to save it, that's good. What I've done here, here's my main patch. Up here, I've got this ADC3. This is listening for the third input on my interface, which my microphone is plugged into. Is what you're listening to me on right now, and this object here is recording it to my hard drive. This is exactly the same thing over here, except it's actually listening to the output of my guitar after it's going through all my stuff. So over here, I just upgraded to this new version of Macs, and so some things are driving me nuts. Like these cables disappear when I lock the patch, but anyway, so you can see out of my microphone into this VST object, which I've used as my bias amp, and then out to a bunch of effects, which I'll get to later. So I've already got it loaded. If I click open, bam, there is my amplifier. Now this is just one of their presets. I haven't really had a lot of a chance to screw around with the sounds, but you should be able to hear this. That's just kind of like a scoopy high gain, sounds good in your bedroom kind of sound. But this is all running out of here, so I can come in here and I can tweak what I want. Here's my power amp. I've got EL34 tubes in it because that's what the Rivera has. I mean, I've tweaked a couple of things. I'm using a C414 instead of an SM57, or the model of one, for the cabinet. I can load in an impulse response if I want to. I don't have any of my own right now, but set up the panel, all this stuff. I mean, I don't want to go through and try and sell you the product. I want to show you how I'm using it, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into this. But so there's my amp. Let's go back to the front panel. My out-of-tune guitar. Anyway, so there's the amp, and that's kind of where the signal starts. It comes in here from the microphone, or from my guitar jack, into the VST plugin, and then out into this next plugin. And these are all set up exactly the same way. So I've got my plugin button, my open button, so I can load everything in and then look at what's going on in the window. And then these, it's just like it's the same instance of these same three objects: plug, open, and VST. The VST is doing all the work, and it just goes through. So what's coming here is my guitar signal is coming in as mono, hitting the bias amp, which again comes out as mono, but I'm splitting it. You can do as many cables off of the same output as you want and hook them up to different objects. So what I've done is I've come out twice and hooked it into the left and right of each of these effects, because these effects are stereo effects, and then I can take my mono signal, convert it to stereo, and then run it through all these stereo effects and output it as stereo, which is pretty flexible. Getting on to what I wanted to do for guitar effects. So Positive Grid has something else that they like to play with. Where is it here? Bias effects. It's kind of a companion to the bias amp thing that they've got, where you can actually design your amps in bias amp, and then you plug it into here, and you can do a stereo setup and do all your stomp boxes, and they're all designed as classic guitar pedals or whatever. I didn't want to do any of that. Like I said, I wanted to push the envelope. I wanted to find some filters and break them and do glitchy stuff and that kind of thing. Like, who knows? I want to do I want to do a dubstep guitar filter, heaven forbid, or something, you know. So instead of that, I found these guys, and I can't even remember where I heard from them first. Some forum search I did somewhere. This company is called Yuhi, I think. It's kind of a play on words, I think it's supposed to be you here, and they just lobbed a bunch of letters off of it. And they make soft synths and stuff like that. This one's called Uhbik for Ubiquitous Effects Bundle, and they've got reverb, delay, flanger phaser, granular synthesizer, all-pass filters for doing stuff like wahs, tremolo slicer, that kind of thing. It's 9 separate plugins, and it's all for $150. And so I thought, well, that's what I'm going to get. And so that's what I did. If we come back to my patch here, unlock it so I can use it. If I'm going to open my phaser patch, here's my phaser, right? Now, this phaser isn't a guitar phaser. It's designed for a digital audio workstation setup, right? So you're recording in Pro Tools or Cubase or Reaper or something like that, and you want to use a phaser on an audio channel. It's not specifically designed for guitar, which is great because now I can do more things with my guitar with it. I believe this phaser can have anywhere from 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I can't remember what the minimum is, probably 4. Yeah, well, 4. Oh, it goes all the way down. Up to 42. You can do 42 stages with it. I still haven't read up on how to use it really well. But, I mean, it's crazy. You can do so many things, which is neat. And I can run it all through here. So there's my phaser. I've got this little switching set up for a bypass. This is what I'm doing in the Max Logic itself. I can click bypass on the VST and bypass it, but I want to do something I can control a little more easily. Plus, I haven't quite read up on how to do that. I'm sure it's MIDI switchable or something if I plug some MIDI data into there. So I've got some logic set up here where these selector objects will take 2 inputs, and depending on what it receives in this first inlet from some non-audio data, basically like a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or however many inputs you tell it wants to listen to, which I've said 2 here, it will choose between 2 inputs to output. So I've got, if we look up at the top here, it might be easier to look at this first one. From the amp, I have it split into left and right on the VST, and then coming out of the VST, I've got left and right split out into the first inlet, the first audio inlet on the selector object. And then I've got the same signal coming to the other inlet of the selector object without going through the VST object. So there's actually 4 audio streams coming out of this one output. And when I click this on and off, it switches between which input these are listening to and sending on. And then it just duplicates every time it goes down the line. Now, the reason I wanted to do it this way instead of using the bypass is also because I want to do things like preserve the tails on the delay, and I'm going to have to work out some fancy programming to make that work. But again, I have the flexibility to do that. I don't have to wait for somebody else to do it and then pay them the money. I just got to be a little ingenuitive with my computer programming and make it work in here. So that's pretty neat. Now, the other super cool thing about it is, like I said, it receives MIDI data as well. So here is my MIDI patch, and I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit. This object MIDI in listens to whatever's coming in from a MIDI device that you choose from this menu item. And right now I've got a Roland FC300 plugged into one of those little M-Audio Midisport, like 1-in, 1-out USB MIDI interfaces. And this MIDI parse object will split all the different data out of these outlets. So this would be like program change message, control change message, sysx messages, all that kind of stuff. So this third inlet is just for control change messages, and I have the board set up in just like control change mode. So all of these are the control change message numbers going through this route thing. So they all come into this one, and then depending on which one it is, it will route that number out of each of these inlets, or these outlets, I mean. And it will switch on these little toggles, because the value that comes through, kind of like MIDI note messages, the control change value will be either 0 or 127 because it's MIDI, and if it's anything other than 0, it will activate this. And then down here I've got this object that says send, and what that does is it's basically just like a wireless little patch cable, and it will send it to any object that says receive, and then with the same name. So this is PH because that goes to the phaser. That's going to be the first outlet, control change message number 65 from the board. So that's going to wirelessly send it to this object here that says receive PH, which is going to activate this toggle, and then do my logic here to change the selectors and bypass the phaser or not. And I've done that with every single one of these. So instead of clicking on the screen now, I just kind of turn and and hit the pedal on my foot controller, which then turns the phaser on and off. I haven't got it dialed in, so the volume doesn't match, but phaser, flanger. I got the tremolo set up with a preset that's a slicer right now, I think. Yeah. And some other stuff. Let me see. Delay. I think it sounds pretty good for something that's not actually designed for guitar. And then here's some reverb. Reverb and flange. Oh, where's my pick? There it is. You know, volume mismatch notwithstanding, I got to tweak with it a bit more. So here's all the cool things you can do with this setup. Now my plan is to use probably one of those Focusrite Sapphire, just one of those little interfaces to plug my guitar into. Right now I'm using my desktop computer and it's got a MOTU 896, but it's FireWire only, and my laptop doesn't have FireWire, so I got to get something else for it. Something cheap with good quality, and I think Focusrite kind of fits the bill. Excuse me, and kind of work from there. And like I said, working on other hardware that just won't even talk to each other, I can do that. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Leap Motion, but it's pretty cool. This is a little infrared sensor, kind of like the old D-beams from Roland, and you can use it to kind of like a Kinect to monitor your hands. It was on a Kickstarter a few years back, and I've got one, and I've got it integrated into Macs because of some nifty extensions that the Macs community has programmed for adding this kind of connectivity in Macs. So, I mean, this thing has no idea how to talk to any of my plugins, but I can get that information into Macs and then use hand movements. I can stick this Leap Motion on my guitar or on a keyboard or something and do all sorts of stuff. I can even controlling filters by, clenching my hand into a fist or opening it up and then moving it around. This is the kind of stuff you can't do with any kind of traditional guitar tech. And I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but this type of thing really gets me interested in the technology and kind of pushing its limits. So there's that. There's also, I didn't pull up the page for that. There's kind of a new communication protocol that the guys at Berkeley... Oh, it's not working. Great. The guys at Berkeley came up with quite a while ago that uses messages the same way MIDI kind of does, but uses Internet Protocol instead of MIDI, and it's far more resolute. You can have integers, floating point numbers, word messages, that kind of stuff, and you can use it through Wi-Fi. So I can send messages from my tablet wirelessly to my computer to control things on my guitar using the internet, and use it all using Macs here as a host. So I'm sure I'll make another video, maybe one that's not quite so long, explaining how I have changed this and made it kind of performance ready. Basically, all I'd have to do here is take my outputs from my interface and throw it at the sound guy at his PA and go from there. I could monitor through the wedge monitor or in-ears or something like that, and I don't even have to worry about bringing an amp. I just bring my laptop and maybe a second screen so I can see what's going on, put it at my feet, my floorboard, my interface, my guitars, and go from there. So, cheers guys, I hope this was remotely interesting, and yeah, I'll make another video sometime later when I kind of perfect this and make it, you know, giggable, that kind of thing. Cheers.